Maybe it's time Margaret stopped acting like this house still belongs to her. My daughter-in-law said it with a smile as she passed the mashed potatoes across the table. Everyone heard her. No one said a word. Not even my son. That was the moment everything changed. I had always believed family dinners were sacred. No matter how busy life became, no matter how many dissents came and went, sitting around the same table meant something. It meant respect. It possessed belonging. At least, that's what I thought. The dining room looked beautiful that Sunday evening. The long oak table was covered with the cream-colored tablecloth I brought out for special occasions. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the room. Candles flickered softly in the center of the table. Outside, the late autumn sky was turning shades of orange and gold. It should have felt warm. It should have felt comforting. Instead, I felt like a guest in my own home. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 71 years old. For nearly 40 years, this house had been my sanctuary. My husband Richard and I raised our son Ethan here. We painted every wall together. We planted every tree in the backyard. Every room carries a memory. Richard had been gone for a little over 2 years, yet sometimes I still expected to hear his footsteps coming down the hallway in the morning. Grief changes shape as time passes. It never truly leaves. Ethan and Olivia had moved into the house 6 months after Richard passed away. They said they wanted to help me. They said they were worried about me living alone. At first, I appreciate the company. The house felt less empty. There was laughter again. Activity. Life. Or at least that's how it seemed. Little things began changing. Furniture was moved without asking me. Family decisions were discussed without including me. Rooms I once used freely suddenly fell off limits. Whenever I noticed these changes, Olivia always had an explanation ready. A reasonable one. A practical one. I convinced myself I was imagining things. I told myself families needed compromise. That evening, however, felt different from the moment everyone sat down. Olivia seemed unusually cheerful. Ethan barely looked at me. He spent most of dinner staring at his plate or checking his phone. Conversation drifted from holiday plans to property taxes to home improvements. Then Olivia set down her fork and smiled. Maybe it's time Margaret stopped acting like this house still belongs to her. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly as intended. My hands froze around my water glass. Across the table, Ethan shifted in his seat. I waited for him to say something. Anything. A laugh. A correction. A defense. Instead, he lowered his eyes. Silence spread through the room. The candles crackled softly. Somewhere outside, a car drove past. I politely smiled and took a sip of water. That's an interesting thing to say, I replied. Olivia snapped. I'm just being honest. No one spoke after that. Dinner ended earlier than usual. Plates were cleared. Chairs scraped against the hardwood floor. Everyone disappeared into different parts of the house. I remained alone at the table long after the candles burned low. Something about her words wouldn't leave me. It wasn't just what she had said. It was the confidence behind it. The certainty. As if she already knew something I didn't. Later that night, unable to sleep, I climbed the narrow attic stairs searching for an old photo album Richard had once stored away. What I found instead was a sealed envelope with my husband's handwritten on the front. And the moment I opened it, I realized that family dinner had only been the beginning. I stood in the attic for several minutes, staring at the envelope in my hands. The dust-covered boxes around me seemed to disappear as I traced Richard's familiar handwriting with my fingertips. My heart was beating faster than it had in years. Richard had always had neat penmanship, steady and deliberate, the kind that reflected the man himself. On the front of the envelope were only 4 words. For Margaret, if needed. I carefully sat down on an old wooden trunk beneath the small attic window. Moonlight filtered through the glass, casting pale silver lines across the floorboards. For a moment, I simply held the envelope. Part of me was afraid to open it. Another part already knew that whatever was inside would explain why Olivia had spoken with such confidence at dinner. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter and several folded documents. The letter was dated 8 months before Richard passed away. As I began reading, it felt as though I could hear his voice. He wrote about ordinary things at first. Memories from our marriage. The day we bought the house. The summer Ethan learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. The maple tree we planted during our 10th anniversary. Then the tone changed. Richard explained that over the last few years he had become concerned about certain conversations involving family finances. He never mentioned Olivia directly at first, but I immediately understood who he meant. He wrote that if I was reading the letter, circumstances had likely unfolded in a way he feared. My stomach tightened. Beneath the letter were copies of legal documents I had never seen before. I spent nearly an hour reading every page. Some sections were difficult to understand, but one fact became clear. Richard had established protections for the house long before his death. Protections that required specific conditions before any transfer or sale could ever take place. Conditions that certainly had not been met. I read everything twice, then 3 times. By the time I finished, the house was completely silent. Somewhere downstairs, a clock chimed midnight. I carefully returned the papers to the envelope and carried it downstairs to my bedroom. Sleep never came. Instead, I sat beside the window watching darkness slowly give way to dawn. As sunlight crept across the backyard, memories surfaced. Small moments I had dismissed over the past 2 years. Olivia insisting on handling mail before I saw it. Ethan avoiding conversations whenever finances were mentioned. Documents disappearing from Richard's office. At the time, each incident seemed insignificant. Now they felt connected. Around 7 o'clock, I heard movement downstairs. Cabinet doors opening. The coffee machine starting. The normal sounds of morning. I tucked the envelope inside the bottom drawer of my dresser and quietly joined the others in the kitchen. Olivia stood at the counter pouring herself coffee. Ethan sat scrolling through his phone. Neither looked surprised to see me. Neither mentioned dinner. Neither apologized. Olivia smiled pleasantly. "Good morning, Margaret." I smiled back. "Good morning." Then I poured my coffee and took a seat. For the first time in months, I stopped feeling confused. I stopped questioning my instincts. They believed they were several steps ahead of me. They believed I knew nothing. So I decided to let them keep believing it. And that decision would change everything that happened next. I spent the next several days doing something I had not done in a very long time. I paid attention, not to what Ethan and Olivia said, but to what they did when they thought nobody was watching. It was surprising how many people revealed when they believed they had already won. Every morning, I followed the same routine. I made coffee. I watered the plants near the kitchen window. I read the newspaper. I politely smiled. Nothing about my behavior changed. Meanwhile, I watched. Olivia spent more time than usual in Richard's old office. She claimed she was organizing paperwork. Ethan often joined her after dinner. Whenever I entered the room unexpectedly, conversation stopped. At first, they will exchange quick glances. Later, they stopped bothering to hide them. Confidence can make people careless. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store earlier than expected. As I stepped through the front door, I heard voices coming from the office. Olivia was speaking. Her tone was calm but determined. "The sooner we handle it, the easier everything becomes." I couldn't hear Ethan's reply. A moment later, the room fell silent. By the time I reached the hallway, both of them emerged smiling as though nothing had happened. I smiled back. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch wrapped in one of Richard's old sweaters. The November air carried a chill that reminded me winter was approaching. The maple tree he planted years ago had almost lost its leaves. I found myself thinking about the first time Olivia came to dinner nearly 15 years earlier. She had been charming, thoughtful. She remembers birthdays, sent thank you notes, helped clear dishes after meals. I truly liked her. Looking back, I realized the changes had happened gradually. So gradually that I never noticed them until they became impossible to ignore. Ethan changed too. Not all at once. One small step at a time. Fewer phone calls. Shorter visits. Less eye contact. The distance grew slowly enough that I kept finding excuses for it. Work stress. Family responsibilities. Life. Parents often become experts explaining away disappointment. A few days later, another strange thing happened. I was sorting mail at the kitchen table when Olivia clicked carrying a folder. She froze briefly when she saw me. It lasted only a second. Then she smiled. "Just handling some paperwork," she said casually. I changed at the folder. Across the tab, I noticed a familiar word. Property. She quickly turned it away. Most people would have confronted her. Most people would have demanded answers. Instead, I returned to my mail. "That sounds important," I said. She appeared relieved. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my room reviewing Richard's documents again. One page caught my attention in a way it had not before. Tucked among the legal papers was the name of an attorney I did not recognize. Beneath it was a handwritten note from Richard. "If circumstances ever become unclear, Speak with Daniel Mercer first. He knows everything. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I looked at the clock. It was nearly 11. Too late to call. But it's not too late to make a decision. The next morning, while Ethan and Olivia believed I was attending my weekly book club meeting, I drove across town to find Daniel Mercer. I had no idea what he was going to tell me. I only knew that Richard had trusted him. And deep inside, I felt that the answers I had been searching for were finally within reach. I found Daniel Mercer's office in a quiet brick building on the edge of downtown. It was the kind of place people passed every day without noticing. A small brass plaque beside the door carried his name. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress. Inside, the reception area was simple and orderly. Framed certificates lined the walls. A clock ticked softly in the corner. When I introduced myself, the receptionist's expression changed immediately. She asked me to wait. Less than 2 minutes later, a tall man in his early 60s stepped into the lobby. "Mrs. Hayes?" he asked. I nodded. "I have been hoping you would come." Those words followed me into his office. Hoping. Not expecting. Not waiting. Hoping. Daniel closed the door behind us and offered me a seat. Richard's name came up almost immediately. The moment he mentioned my husband's name, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Even after 2 years, hearing someone speak about Richard in the present tense still caught me off guard. Daniel opened a file drawer and removed a thick folder. "Your husband was a careful man," he said. "He believed in preparing for possibilities most people prefer not to think about." I thought about the envelope, the letter, the warnings hidden between ordinary memories. What exactly did he prepare for? I asked. Daniel studied me for a moment before answering. "Before I explain that, I need to ask a question. Have there been any recent discussions involving ownership of your home?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was astonishing how directly he had arrived at the center of everything. I told him about the family dinner. I repeated Olivia's words exactly. I described Ethan's silence. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he slowly nodded. Then Richard's concerns were justified. He opened the folder and turned several pages toward me. Some documents carried dates from nearly 3 years before Richard passed away. Others were more recent. Every page revealed another piece of a puzzle I had not known existed. Richard had noticed changes long before I did. He had observed conversations, requests, questions about property and inheritance that troubled him. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just enough to make him uncomfortable, enough to make him cautious. He never wanted conflict inside the family, Daniel explained. But he also wanted to make certain you would always have control over your future. I stared at the documents spread across the desk. Suddenly, dozens of memories resurfaced. Casual questions Olivia had asked over the years. Suggestions disguised as concern. Discussions about downsizing. Assisted living communities. Selling and used property. At the time, they seemed harmless. Now they looked different. Much different. Daniel handed me one final document. Unlike the others, it carried Richard's signature and a date from only 6 months before his death. "He instructed me to give this to you only if circumstances required it," Daniel said quietly. I looked down at the page. My eyes moved across the first few lines. Then I stopped breathing for a moment. Because what Richard had arranged was far more significant than I ever imagined. And if Daniel was right, neither Ethan nor Olivia had any idea it existed. I left Daniel Mercer's office with the folder resting on the passenger seat beside me. During the drive home, I stopped at a small coffee shop and sat alone near the window. I needed time to think. Outside, people hurried along the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and paper cups. Life moved normally for everyone else. Mine suddenly felt very different. I opened the folder again and carefully reviewed every page. Richard had not simply protected the house. He had created an entire structure designed to prevent anyone from pressuring me into decisions that were not truly mine. The final document established a family trust that could not be altered without my direct authorization and independent legal review. Even more surprising, Richard had transferred several valuable assets into that trust long before his death. Assets I had assumed were handled through his estate. Daniel had explained why. Richard worried that grief could make me vulnerable. He wanted safeguards in place. As I sat there reading his words, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Relief. Not because the situation was resolved. It was not. But because I finally understood that Richard had seen what I failed to see. He had been watching quietly, preparing quietly, protecting me quietly. When I returned home that afternoon, everything appeared normal. Olivia was arranging decorations in the dining room. Ethan was working on his laptop. They greeted me casually. Neither asked where I had been. Neither seemed concerned. I smiled and carried my purse upstairs. That evening I paid closer attention than ever before. After dinner, Olivia brought up the subject of renovations. She spoke enthusiastically about expanding the kitchen and converting part of the first floor into a larger open living space. Ethan nodded along. Then she casually mentioned that selling a portion of the property behind the house could help finance future improvements. Her tone was light, almost playful, but I noticed something else. She watched my reaction carefully. Waiting, measuring, testing. I simply nodded. That sounds like a lot to consider, I said. Olivia seemed encouraged. Over the following week, the conversations became more frequent. Property values, maintenance costs, future planning. Every discussion somehow returned to the house. Every discussion carried the same underlying message. Change was coming. They wanted me to become comfortable with that idea. What they did not realize was that I had started keeping notes, dates, comments, documents I happened to see left on counters, phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered a room. Nothing dramatic by itself. Together, however, a pattern was emerging. Then one afternoon something unexpected happened. Ethan arrived home early from work. I was in the kitchen baking an apple pie. He sat down across from me and looked unusually nervous. For several moments he said nothing. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mom, have you ever thought about simplifying things?" The question sounded innocent. But after everything I had learned, I heard the concern beneath it. Or perhaps the pressure. I looked at my son carefully. For the first time, I wondered how much he truly knew. Was he following Olivia's lead? Or was he convincing himself that everything they were doing was reasonable? I could not answer that question yet. So I smiled gently and continued peeling apples. "I think about many things these days," I replied. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he said something that made my heart sink. "Good, because there may be some important decisions coming soon." After that conversation, I became certain of one thing. Ethan and Olivia believed they were guiding me toward a decision that had already been made. The only question was how long they intended to keep pretending that I still had a choice. Over the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what they expected. I remained calm. I asked no difficult questions. I offered no objections. Whenever the subject of the house came up, I listened politely and changed the subject. The more agreeable I appeared, the more comfortable they became. One evening, while I was folding laundry in the family room, Olivia walked in carrying a stack of brochures. She placed them on the coffee table in front of me with a bright smile. "I thought you might find these interesting," she said. The brochures were for retirement communities. Beautiful photographs filled the pages. Walking trails, community gardens, clubhouses, smiling seniors holding coffee cups beneath sunny skies. Olivia sat beside me and began describing the amenities. She spoke as if she had rehearsed every sentence. I listened quietly. When she finished, I closed the brochure and placed it neatly back on the table. "They look lovely," I said. Relief flashed across her face so quickly that she probably thought I missed it. But I did not. Later that night, I overheard part of a conversation from the hallway outside the kitchen. Ethan and Olivia did not realize I was nearby. "She is coming around," Olivia said. "I told you she would." Ethan sounded uncertain. "I just do not want this turning into something ugly." Olivia laughed softly. "It will not. Everything is practically settled already." Practically settled. Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. The next morning I called Daniel Mercer again. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. I shared everything I had observed. The brochures, the conversations, the increasing pressure. Daniel listened carefully before reaching into his briefcase. He handed me copies of several public records he had recently obtained. The moment I saw them, I understood why he looked concerned. A development company had expressed interest in acquiring several neighboring properties, including portions of the land surrounding my home. The potential value was far higher than I had imagined. Suddenly, every conversation about downsizing, renovations, and future planning made perfect sense. This was never just about helping me simplify my life. There was a financial opportunity involved, a very large one. As I drove home, I felt strangely calm. Not angry, not heartbroken, just clear. The pieces finally fit together. Richard had seen the possibility years earlier. Daniel had confirmed it. And now I understood why Olivia had become so confident. She believed the outcome was inevitable. That evening, Ethan announced there would be a family gathering the following Saturday. Nothing formal, he said. Just a chance for everyone to discuss some future plans together. Olivia smiled across the table. It will be good for all of us to get on the same page. I smiled back. I think that is an excellent idea. Neither of them noticed that for the first time since Richard died, I was no longer reacting to their plans. I was preparing my own. The week passed slowly. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary. Olivia continued discussing future plans with increasing confidence. Ethan appeared less anxious than before. Whatever concerns he once had seemed to be fading. The closer we moved toward the family gathering, the more relaxed they became. I suspected they believed the difficult part was over. They thought I was accepting the direction they had chosen for me. In many ways, that assumption became their greatest mistake. The gathering was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. During the days leading up to it, relatives began calling to confirm they would attend. My sister Helen planned to come. Ethan's cousin Brian would be there as well. Even a few family friends were invited. The event was beginning to feel less like a casual conversation and more like a carefully staged presentation. On Thursday evening, Olivia brought home several folders and spread them across the dining room table. I noticed charts, property estimates, and photographs. She worked late into the night organizing everything. Whenever she saw me nearby, she smiled warmly. Her friendliness felt almost rehearsed. I think everyone will appreciate seeing the options clearly, she said. It will help people understand what makes sense. I nodded politely. Clarity is always helpful. That answer seemed to satisfy her. The following morning, I met Daniel one final time before the gathering. We reviewed every document Richard had left behind. We discussed timing. We discussed procedures. Most importantly, we discussed patience. Daniel reminded me that facts were most powerful when people revealed their intentions first. I understood exactly what he meant. By the time I returned home, I felt completely prepared. Saturday arrived with bright sunshine and unusually warm weather for late autumn. Cars began filling the driveway shortly after noon. Family members entered carrying desserts, drinks, and cheerful conversation. Laughter echoed through the house. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared to be a happy family reunion. Olivia moved through the rooms greeting everyone with effortless charm. Ethan helped arrange chairs in the living room. I watched quietly from the kitchen doorway. More than once, I caught Olivia exchanging confident looks with Ethan. She truly believed this day would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Around 2 o'clock, everyone settled into their seats. Olivia stood near the fireplace holding one of her folders. Ethan remained beside her. The room gradually grew quiet. Then Olivia began speaking. She talked about family responsibility, practical planning, financial opportunities, future generations. Her presentation was polished and persuasive. Several relatives nodded along. She displayed photographs of the property, market reports, development projections, potential profits. Everything was carefully organized. Finally, she reached the point she had been building toward all afternoon. She smiled and looked directly at me. Margaret has been very open-minded throughout this process, she said. And we believe it may finally be time to make some important decisions together. Around the room, heads turned toward me. Every eye was suddenly focused in my direction. I could feel Olivia expecting agreement, expecting cooperation, expecting gratitude. Instead, I folded my hands calmly in my lap and smiled. Because sitting quietly near the back of the room was someone they never expected to see. Daniel Mercer had just arrived. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The room seemed to freeze as Daniel stepped forward and greeted several relatives by name. I watched confusion spread across Ethan's face. Olivia recovered first. Her smile remained in place, but it looked different now. Tighter, more cautious. I did not realize we were expecting a guest, she said. Daniel smiled politely. Margaret invited me. The silence that followed was impossible to ignore. Ethan glanced at me. Mom, he asked. I folded my hands calmly. I thought it would be useful to have someone present who understands Richard's estate planning better than anyone else. Several relatives exchanged curious looks. Olivia laughed softly. Of course, more information is always helpful. But I noticed she no longer seemed as relaxed as before. Daniel took a seat and listened while Olivia finished her presentation. She spoke about opportunity, growth, financial security. By the time she concluded, the proposal sounded almost irresistible. Then Daniel cleared his throat. May I ask a few questions? Olivia nodded. Certainly. Daniel opened a folder. You mentioned future ownership changes several times. Have all parties been informed about the restrictions currently attached to the property? Olivia blinked. Restrictions? Daniel nodded. The trust provisions established by Richard Hayes. The room grew noticeably quieter. Ethan looked confused. Olivia's expression barely changed, but I saw the color leave her face. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied. Daniel removed several documents and placed them on the coffee table. These provisions prevent any transfer, development agreement, sale, or structural change without Margaret's direct authorization and independent legal review. Ethan leaned forward immediately. What provisions? He asked. Daniel handed him a copy. As Ethan read, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. I could almost see him realizing how much he did not know. Olivia remained silent. Daniel continued. There is another important detail. Several surrounding assets and land interests are also held within the trust. Their management authority belongs exclusively to Margaret. A murmur spread through the room. My sister Helen stared at me in surprise. Brian looked from Ethan to Olivia and back again. Nobody seemed certain what to say. Then Daniel calmly revealed the final piece. The development opportunity everyone had been discussing could not proceed without my approval. Not next month. Not next year. Not ever. The decision belonged entirely to me. For the first time all afternoon, Olivia looked directly at me instead of through me. I met her gaze without anger, without satisfaction, just clarity. Ethan slowly lowered the papers. Mom, did you know all of this? I nodded. For a little while now. His eyes widened. Why did you not say anything? I looked around the room. Because sometimes people reveal more when they think you are not paying attention. Nobody spoke after that. The presentation folders remained untouched on the table. The confidence that had filled the room earlier seemed to disappear. And as I watched the expressions around me, I realized something important. The truth was finally sitting at the table with us. And unlike everything else that day, it could not be ignored. The gathering ended far differently than anyone expected. One by one, relatives began leaving the house. Some offered quiet words of support. Others simply hugged me before walking out the door. The energy that had filled the rooms earlier was gone. In its place was reflection. Reality has a way of changing conversations. After the last guest departed, silence settled over the house once again. Daniel gathered his documents and prepared to leave. Before he stepped outside, he shook my hand and smiled. Richard would be proud of how you handled today, he said. I thanked him. Then I stood on the front porch and watched his car disappear down the street. For the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Not because I had won anything, but because I no longer felt invisible. Inside, Ethan was sitting alone at the dining room table. The same table where so many important moments had unfolded. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. When he saw me enter, he lowered his eyes. Mom, I need to ask you something. I sat across from him. All right. He hesitated before speaking. Did Dad really think things would end up like this? The question carried more sadness than anger. I thought about Richard's letter. His careful planning. His quiet concern. I think your father hoped he was wrong, I answered softly. Ethan stared at the table for several seconds. I did not know about most of those documents. I believed him. There was disappointment in his voice, but also confusion. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped asking questions. He had allowed other people to do the thinking for him. That realization seemed to weigh heavily on him now. Upstairs, I could hear Olivia moving through the bedroom. Drawers opening and closing. Footsteps crossing the floor. The house felt different. Not broken, just honest. Sometimes honesty arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives all at once. Over the following weeks, many things changed. Conversations became more direct. Boundaries became clearer. Decisions that once seemed automatic were discussed openly. Some relationships healed slowly. Others required time. I learned not to rush either process. One afternoon, several months later, I found myself sitting alone on the back porch watching sunlight filter through the maple tree Richard planted years ago. Winter had passed. New leaves had appeared. The garden was beginning to bloom again. A gentle breeze moved across the yard. For the first time in a very long time, the future did not feel uncertain. It felt mine. I thought back to that family dinner months earlier. The careless comment. The silence that followed. The moment I realized something was wrong. At the time, I believed I was losing my place in the family. I was wrong. What I was really losing was the illusion that staying silent would protect the people I loved. Sometimes protecting a family means telling the truth. Sometimes it means standing your ground. And sometimes it means trusting yourself when everyone else expects you not to. Richard understood that long before I did. As the sun began to set beyond the backyard fence, I smiled and looked around the home we built together. The house had not changed. The memories had not changed. The people inside it were still learning. But one thing was finally certain. No one would ever decide my future for me again.